All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Torah Studies. It's great to see everybody here tonight, and it's great to study together in this, or on this, Wednesday of the Torah portion of Shemot. I would ask, what's the name of the Torah portion? What are the names? But yeah, trick question. Not so tricky, but kind of tricky. Okay, so let's pass these around. So our focus is going to be on Moses and his speech impediment. This is going to be today's major topic. There you go. In case we need more, we're good. Okay, so let's begin. So the book of Shemot opens up with the tale of Egyptian Exodus. It's a very difficult tale. When I say difficult, I mean it's a very painful story to read. Decrees against the Jewish people, against the boys. We know the Midrash adds on even more details, horrific details of how Pharaoh, because he was afflicted with leprosy, so he had this thing where I don't know who prescribed this for him, maybe his physicians, whatever, that they told him to bathe in blood. And so he bathed, that's what the Midrash says, he bathed in the blood of the Jewish boys. So, I mean, this is not a detail that's in Torah, but it's a detail it's horrific. You think of ancient times, when there was a class of people that were classified as slaves, especially in ancient times. I mean, who's advocating, right? Who's making sure that it doesn't go too far? I mean, the depths are the limit for how low that can go and how horrific that could be, and indeed that's what happened. So the Torah portion clearly begins in a very begins by naming the tribes, the Jewish people, but then it quickly goes into the pain and the terrible hardship of the slavery. The Torah then segues into the birth of Moses, and of course the great irony of history is that Moses is born and raised subsequently in Pharaoh's own house, in Pharaoh's palace. Torah tells us about Moshe growing up, tells us 3 stories that happen of him fighting for the underdog. When there's an Egyptian beating a Jewish man, he stands up for the Jewish man. When there's one Jew fighting with another Jew, again he intervenes for what's right. And when he's in Midian, and the shepherds are harassing the young women, including his future wife, he steps in chivalrously. That's a word that ought not exist in that form. Chivalrously. Wow, so many parts to that.
Walter Scott. I read Walter Scott in Hebrew when I was a child.
I don't know who Walter Scott is. Was he chivalrous?
He wrote about chivalry.
There you go. Chivalry I can say. The other one is a little bit complicated. Anyway, the point is that he steps in and he does what's right and he helps them out. And so we have this portrait of a person who doesn't grab leadership, but he steps up in situations where there's a need. Someone's oppressed, someone's being persecuted, someone's being dealt with in a negative way, and he steps in. Okay, it's at that point that essentially God says, This is my guy. This is my leader. And then I'll just fill in some of the rest of the details. We're right now 354, 355, chapter 3 of the book of Exodus. And here we have the epic encounter at the burning bush. You know the famous joke? Yes? About George Bush? Yeah? Who goes to Israel? You know this one? George Bush goes to Israel and he sees... At the airport, he sees Moses. Not Moses, Cohen, the accountant. No, he sees Moses from biblical times. Moshe Rabbeinu. Moses, original Moses OG. So, first of all, he's shocked, because how is it possible? And we don't even know in this story how it's possible, but this is what he sees. So he goes over and from across the terminal a little bit, he says, Moses! Moses kind of glances quickly, looks away, and ignores him. Gets closer. Moses! Ignores him. Total shade. throwing shade on him. Goes again, right up to his face, Moses, it's me, President Bush. Why don't you say hi? Why don't you acknowledge? Moses turns to him and says, listen, last time I spoke to a bush, I got stuck for 40 years. Yeah, something like that. Okay, that's the joke. So Moses,
said, I'm saving you from burning up.
Oh, that's hot take. So here's what happens. The story in the Torah just says Moses was pasturing the flocks of Yisro, and he sees the burning bush. But the story that the Midrash tells us is that he had a flock of sheep. And there was one little sheep, what we might call a shepsela, little sheep. That's what you say, shepsela. In Yiddish, shepsela is little sheep. And which ran off from the rest of the flock. Moses, the quintessential leader, who cares not just about the flock in general, right? Generally speaking, we're okay. No, but each specific sheep, even the little one, right, he cares about. So he ran after the little one. And the other ones, whatever happens, happens. But this, no, he made sure the other ones were fine, ran after the little one, and then realized the little one was hungry, thirsty, tired, whatever it was. And so he picks up the sheep. How do I know this? Because it's in the Medrash. And I happen to play in a play called Exodus. I happen to star as Moses. This is legit. This is true. This is a true story. And so part of my part was to actually hold a sheep. We had a sheep.
A real sheep?
Real sheep. Yeah, legit. We eat it. No fake sheep. I mean, what is that? Who does that? What is that even? What is it? Cotton balls? Like what? We had a real sheep. I had a staff. Yeah, I told him what to do. No, I had a staff stick, and I had a sheep.
The sheep wasn't afraid of the Aryeh.
Yeah, hopefully, exactly. It's a messianic time where the sheep will lie with the lion, and everything was fine. Anyway, the point is that he's carrying the sheep, and at that point, that's when God appears to Moses at the burning bush and says, Moses, Moses, and the rest is history. Okay, so we're not going to read this section. But we all know what happens next, right? So God says to Moses, I want to tap you as the Redeemer. You're going to be the person to go to Pharaoh and tell him, let my people go to worship me on the mountain, etc. And what does Moses famously say? What's his response to God? Essentially, no, not doing this. Did not sign up for this. Did not ask for this. Not on my plans for the day or for tomorrow. I'm going to respectfully decline. And he tries every angle to decline. He talks about, okay, let's go through some of these. So 355 is basically God's pitch. 357, I love these captions. Moshe declines God's mission. That was easy, right? So here we have the decline. So what does Moses say? So look at the top of 311. Not page 311, but chapter 3, verse 11. So first of all, Moshe says to God, who am I that I should do this? Like who am I? God says, I'll be with you. And then Moses says to God, I don't even know your name. So God gives him a name. And then what else does Moses say? Moses says, yeah, exactly. Then what does Moses say? Okay, turn a few pages, please, to chapter 4. It took a week of this back and forth. So chapter 4, Moshe questions God, but it's all part of his declining the mission. So Moshe says, right there, 4:1, he says, they're not going to believe me. I'm wasting my time. I'm going to go to them and say I'm the Redeemer, God sent me. I'm going to go to Pharaoh, let my people go, the whole deal. The people are like, yeah, whatever. We're building pyramids here. This whole scheme. Thank you. All right. Pharaoh's scheme to build pyramids. All right. Made off like a bandit. Did Pharaoh. All right. So what's the point? So they decline. Moshe declines, says, they're not going to believe me anyway. What's the point of doing this? Okay, let's turn the page. 363. Here Moshe pulls out, I think so we've had 3 excuses so far. Number 1, who am I? Like I'm not qualified. No, God says you are qualified, I'll be with you. Then he says, I don't know your name. Okay, here's my name. And here's some signs. Then Moshe says, the people are not going to believe me. The people will believe you. So Moshe now pulls out excuse or whatever. Argument number 4. Lisa, are you ready? Yes. The speech of 363, right at the top, verse. Well, hold on. Maybe we want to go back one. No, we're good right here. 363, verse 10.
Moshe said to God, I beg you, my master, I am not a man of words, not yesterday, not the day before, not from the very time that you spoke to your servant, for I am heavy of mouth and heavy of tongue. God said to him, who gave man a mouth, or who makes a person dumb or deaf, sighted or blind? Is it not I, God? So now go, I will be your mouth, I will teach you what you should say.
Perfect. All we need so far are these two verses. Now, so someone tell me, or more than someone can tell me, what is Moshe's argument and what is God's rebuttal? What does Moshe say? Don't send me, I'm not the right guy. Why? Because I can't speak. Yeah. He uses the phrase, I'm heavy of mouth and heavy of tongue, which it doesn't specifically say what the issue is, but clearly he's saying he's not the right person to be a speaker or a spokesperson or someone communicating with Pharaoh. He's saying something with the speech is not so good. And what is God's response? What does God say? What's the answer?
You're fine.
Yeah. Who makes people speak anyway? It's me, so you'll be okay. Make sense? Ish? Okay. By the way, then Moshe goes on to number 5, saying, oh, send Aaron or Mashiach or whatever, send someone else. Again, trying to get out of it, and God responds to that, and eventually Moshe is left without a choice, and he has to take on the mission, which he does. But we're going to focus on this piece of it. Now, what happened to his speech? What does it mean, heavy of mouth and heavy of tongue? Why couldn't he speak? What was the speech impediment? What was the source? I'm glad you asked. Let's look at the Midrash Rabbah. Open up, please, your Torah studies booklets. This is probably going to be, if I had to venture, I would say maybe text 2. Or yeah, is it text 2?
Yeah.
Okay, text 2. Amy, please read this. Hold on. What page are we on?
229.
229. Fantastic. Okay, please take it away. Here is a very classic midrashic teaching about the backstory of Moshe's speech impediment.
The daughter of Pharaoh hugged and kissed baby Moses, loving him as her own child as he stayed with her in the palace. The lad was beautiful, and all wished to see him, not letting their eyes part from his. Pharaoh, too, would hug and kiss him as they were playing. Moses once rested Pharaoh's crown and placed it on his own head, evoking the future when he would indeed do so after growing up. The Egyptian sorcerers were present and said that the lad has taken your crown and placed it on his own head concerns us. We're concerned that this boy is the one about whom you foretold that he will wrest his kingdom from you.
So just to quickly just point out, it was the sorcerers or astrologers of Pharaoh who had told him that there was going to be a redeemer born, and he would have some sort of Egyptian connection, and he's going to take the crown from you, and he's going to overthrow you, etc. And when they see this kid pull the crown off, they're like, he may be the one. This may be such a Jewish name, Moshe. I mean, how did you miss that? Total red flag. No, I'm kidding. It was an Egyptian word, but whatever. Right? So, okay, continue.
Some of the advisors suggested to kill him. Others suggested to burn him.
I love how that's like two different things. I love how that's like, don't kill him. Just burn him. It's fine. I mean, like, all right, whatever.
Jethro, who was to become Moses' father-in-law, was present among them and suggested, the boy is yet a foolish child. Let us test him and see. We will place 2 platters before him, one of gold and another of coals. If the boy will reach for the gold, we will know that he acts deliberately, and we will kill him. But if he reaches for the coals, we will know that he does not act with purpose, and he is not deserving of death. They did so, and the boy reached for the gold. The angel Gabriel came and pushed his hand, and Moses grabbed the coal instead and put it in his mouth, burning his tongue. From then on, his speech was impaired.
What a great story. So many layers. Thank you. Look at all this. You have Moses, kind of the foreshadowing of this whole story of pulling off the crown, putting on his own head. It's amazing. Then you have Jethro, Yisro, his future father-in-law, who at that point was one of the advisors of Pharaoh, who's in the palace, who saves his own future son-in-law from certain death at that point. Crazy, right? So many layers. So what's the test? The test is, put gold in front of him and coal in front of him. So if he reaches for the gold, then you know that he knows what he's doing. Why? I guess, I don't know, coal would be more naturally attractive for a kid to, I don't know. Who knows? Who knows? Maybe it's more luminescent. I don't know. But if he goes for the gold, then he says, God forbid, take him out. If not, then it's okay. So he goes for the gold, but the angel redirects his hand. He picks up the coal, puts it in his mouth. Boom. Speech impediment. Okay, so that's the story. We're going to get back to this a little bit later. But a few questions now on the verses that we read. So God says to Moses, I want you to be the one to go to Pharaoh. Well, go to the people and tell them it's time. Because there was a prophecy. They knew that at some point they would be redeemed. So one of Moses' mission is to go to the people and tell them it's now time to be redeemed. And the second is to go to Pharaoh and tell him, let my people go. And so Moses is saying, I have a speech impediment. So I'll ask you a question. Doesn't Moses know that God knows that he has that? God's like, oh, I've totally forgot you're right. I don't know what I was thinking. Totally messed that up. You were carrying the sheep. It was so beautiful and lovely. I totally forgot about the whole speaking thing. Obviously, God knows about that. So how is Moses, what's his strategy here? He's informing God of his deficiency in speaking? God certainly knows that. And conversely, what's the answer? God says, no, I'm in charge of speech. Does Moses not know that? Does Moses not know that God can make him speak even if he has a speech impediment? In other words, what's Moses? It seems like no one is sharing new information with the other. Not Moses to God and not God to Moses. Moses telling God, FYI, I have a speech impediment. God knows. Moses tells God, I can make miracles. Hello. You're speaking to God at a burning bush for a week. Things can happen that are miraculous. So what's really going on in the dialogue? If you don't look too deeply, yeah, he's trying to get out of it. Moses says, I can't do it. God's like, no, I'll help you do it on a very simple level. But if you look a little bit closer, you can ask these questions. And that is, again, just reiterate it, they all seem to be saying things that the other person knows. God knows about the speech impediment. Moses knows about what God can do. Fine. Next question. 2 chapters later. Chapter 6 of Exodus. So it's actually in next week's Torah portion. Not in Shemot, but in Va'era. Right before the plagues begin, this is after Moses had a few conversations with...
Page 374.
Actually, 380... wait, hold on. 380...
610.
380... Oh, yeah. Where's that?
374.
374. Perfect. I was right there. 10 pages away.
The rabbi's always right.
370. No, thank you. 374, 375. Perfect. Take a look at the top. Mike, please read this one. Where you have, right top of 375.
God spoke to Moses, saying, Come speak to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, that he should send the children of Israel from his land. Moshe spoke before God, saying, If the children of Israel did not listen to me, then how will Pharaoh listen to me? I have sealed lips. Now
thank you. This is after Moses has gone to the people, and after he's gone to Pharaoh, and after Pharaoh has made it worse for them. Right? This is next week's Torah portion. This is after a bunch of stuff has happened. Moses has agreed to the mission. He's gone out already. Whatever. Now we have another dialogue. God is telling him again to go to Pharaoh. He already went to Pharaoh, but go again to Pharaoh. And now he's trotting back out this excuse of, I have sealed lips. I can't do it. I have the speech impediment thing again. So our third question is, why is Moses bringing up old points again? It seems like, number one, he already expressed that to God, and number two, God already told him, don't worry, I'll make it happen. So why bring it up again 2 chapters later?
The first rabbi in history, he didn't want to speak.
He didn't want to speak, right. He's like, no, you got the wrong guy. I'm not giving a sermon. God's like, you got to give the sermon. And ever since, they haven't stopped. They haven't making up for it. Rabbis ever since. They don't stop. Okay, so again, 3 questions so far. We're going to add one more, and then we're going to get to some answers. We have 4 answers, or 4 explanations about this entire dialogue. But again, let's understand. Question number 1 is, what is Moses telling God regarding a speech impediment? Certainly God knows. What is God's response to Moses that he can make it happen? Doesn't Moses already know that? Question number 3 is, why is Moses reiterating 2 chapters later about the speech impediment when certainly he already had that conversation and he already certainly remembers what God said, which is, I got your back. Next question, 4th question is, this is more of a philosophical question, and that is, if Moses is meant to be the Redeemer of Israel and the person who is in many ways the face and the spokesperson, so why indeed is Moses the one who has the speech impediment? Doesn't make sense. It's not nice. It's not nice that huh?
It's a lesson.
Hold on. So, but let me articulate the question. The question is, it doesn't seem nice that the Redeemer, the spokesperson, the leader, etc., should have a speech impediment. Let's see how the Ran, Rabbi Nissim of Gerona, explains, articulates this question. David, please read text number 4, 232.
It is very surprising. God endowed Moses with perfection, lifting him to the heights higher than all of humanity. So why did God wish that he lacks such a basic function as speech that any ordinary person can fully master with ease? For the benefit of the people he represents, and so that his words be well received, it is only proper that a prophet be gifted in matters that ordinary people hold in high regard. Accordingly, how is it possible that Moses' speech be deficient? It is beyond doubt that after all the intellectual and emotional qualities, there is no more fitting quality for a prophet to possess than speech. After all, the prophet must constantly speak publicly. Indeed, we find that Moses himself asked this question. After being chosen as a prophet, how is it possible that he should be lacking in speech? As the verse states, I am not a man of words. This is a question. How can it be that after you have spoken to your servant and charged him with a mission, you have not removed this impediment? God only answered, who gave man a mouth? On the surface of it, the answer does not address the question at all.
This is from the Drashot HaRan. The Ran, one of the greatest scholars of all time in Jewish history, he published his own, or I don't know if he published them, but his sermons have been published. He lived in the 1200s, I think. 1300s. What's his bio?
1320 or
1300s. Yeah, early 1300s. Early to mid 1300s. And his sermons, 600 years later, 650, whatever. Actually, 1320. It's now 2020. Got to update my century count. 700 years ago, he was born, and we have his sermons. So he asked this question, and he says, it's not nice. It's not nice that Moses can't speak. Moses is meant to be emblematic, we would think, of perfection. He's a prophet. He's got a lot of things to communicate between him and God and between him and the people. So how can he be lacking such a fundamental quality? And in fact, he explains, this is what Moses is telling God. He's not just trying to get out of the mission. He's telling God something very specific. He's telling God, it's not nice that the leader that you're trying to tap for this mission should have a speech impediment. And God starts saying, well, who gives man a mouth? Anyway, it's me. As he says, that doesn't seem to answer the question. Practically speaking, the representative, the leader, the prophet, has to be able to speak. Okay. Fine. So these are 4 questions. It's like Passover here. All right, it's Exodus. It's fitting, huh? We're getting close. Okay. So let's jump in to several explanations from the commentaries. And we're going to start, we'll focus the commentaries on the last question we asked about it not being nice that the leader can't speak or has a speech impediment. Why didn't God fix it or choose someone else that could speak nicely? So, let's look at the Ramban. This is the commentary of the Ramban, Nachmanides, text 5a. David.
Moses said, "For I am heavy of mouth and heavy of tongue, a condition I have had yesterday and the day before yesterday." In other words, Moses said, "From my youth I have had a speech impediment, and still now from the time you have spoken to your servant I still have a speech impediment. For you did not remove my speech impediment when you instructed me to go to Pharaoh and speak in your name. If so, how can I go to him?"
So, Nachmanides says, very simply and very clearly, that this was exactly Moses' response to God. God says, go to Pharaoh, tell him, let my people go. And Moses says, I have a speech impediment, and you haven't fixed it, right? You haven't fixed it. We've been talking for a week now or so, right? You haven't fixed it. You haven't healed me. So how can I go to him? Continue, please. Oh, I'm sorry. You're in the middle of the text. Continue.
In his great unwillingness to go, Moses did not ask God to remove his speech impediment. Rather, he took the opposite approach and claimed that since, after instructing him on his mission, God did not remove it, therefore don't instruct me to go. For it is unfitting for the King of the universe to send a man of closed lips to represent him to a king.
So he's basically using the question of the Ramban, of the Ran, the last question that we asked, as an explanation of why Moses is telling God not to send him. Right? You've tapped me for this mission, but you haven't healed me, so it's not nice. Right? Remember the Ran was saying it's not nice that the leader should not be able to speak. And the Ramban is saying that's exactly what Moses was telling God. It's not nice to send someone who can't speak to represent God and the Jewish people to a king, to Pharaoh.
That, I think God told Moses that Aaron will be his mouth.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like, he's not fixing, but
somebody else will be. I guess you could say that nonetheless. Huh?
It's the other section.
I guess you could. No, it's here.
It's here?
No, it's the first. It's in this week's parasha where he says that. Yeah, he says that Aaron will be. Yeah. Hold on. Let's find it.
So he actually answered. You don't have to.
Here.
He will speak for you.
He will speak on your behalf to the people. He will be your spokesman, and you will be his leader. But still, who is the face? Who's the face? It's still Moses. And it's not nice if the face can't speak. So then have someone who can do it all. I understand what you're saying. There was a workaround, but it's not the nicest way to do it. I mean, you have somebody, you have somebody there who's representing, who's the leader, but he has this apparent deficiency. Okay, I mean, obviously we're going to deal with this in today's class, but these are some of the questions that, at least on the surface, are being
later
expressed.
on in chapter 6.
As well.
Yeah, he says, Aron achicha
Here we have right here in chapter 4 it says, V'hayahu yiyeh lecha lefeh, v'ata tieh lo lelokim, or lelohim, that he will be for you lepeh, as a mouth, and okay. Nonetheless, so Moses is saying, you should have healed me. If you want me to be the leader, really, essentially, you should have healed me. So what's God's response? Take a look at 5b. David, please continue, 235.
In light of the midrash above, I would suggest that God did not want to remove Moses' speech impediment, inasmuch as his impediment was the result of a miracle that occurred with Moses and Pharaoh.
So Ramban says, Nachmanides explains, that why didn't God heal him? Because it was the sign that God had done a miracle to save Moses' life. When Moses had reached for the gold, and God caused a miracle to send the angel Gabriel to move his hand to the coal, and he put it in his mouth as a remembrance of God sparing his life as a young child, he wanted him to remain with a speech impediment. So although Moses was right that it's not nice necessarily for the leader to have the speech impediment, and ideally if God wanted him to be the leader, he should have taken it away. God says, I have an overriding rationale for why I don't want to take away the speech impediment, because that is the sign of the miracle that happened decades earlier. Moses is now 80 years old. This happened when he was a young child. So this is decades earlier, and God says, I still want it around. This is one opinion, one explanation, Nachmanides. Let's take a look at text number 6. Now we have the Shalah, commentary number 2. The Shalah, Rabbi Yeshaya Levi Horowitz, who wrote the Shnei Luchot HaBrit, known as the Shalah HaKadosh, the Holy Shalah, he gives a similar explanation for why God did not remove the speech impediment, but it's even more, I think it's even more dramatic. Text number 6, Chazan, please read.
When Moses came to warn Pharaoh about the plagues, Aaron was his spokesman and proof to the fact that Moses' speech was impaired. When Pharaoh saw that Aaron was the one warning him and Moses was indeed impaired, he remembered the events years ago, how Moses had taken his crown and how, due to his advisor's suggestion, Moses' speech was ultimately impaired. When he remembered all that, he realized that Moses indeed wished to wrest the crown from his head, and heaven had prevented him from taking revenge. This then is what the verse states. See, I have made you a lord over Pharaoh.
God says to Moses at some point, see, I have made you a lord over Pharaoh. In the Hebrew, Re'eh Nesaticha Elokim Lefaro, or Elohim Lefaro, because it's not God Lord, but it's a human lord over someone else. So what does that mean? The Shalah explains it's psychological. It's totally psychological. It's getting in Pharaoh's head. Because by Moses still having the speech impediment, Pharaoh is reminded of the story that happened decades earlier when he reached for the coal. And he realized that when he reached for the crown, in other words, it's trying to impress upon Pharaoh that the tides are shifting, and the fear that you had of Moses overtaking you is going to happen. It's going down now. This is not just some new guy, Moses, who's come, who's has these fantasies about the Jewish people being freed. No, this is the guy who you were worried about 80 years ago. You were worried about the day he was born. You were worried about when he was a young man, when he was a young boy. You were concerned, and now it's happening. So it's to get into his head, to get him to fear Moses. That's what it means. Yeah? No?
I'm just thinking, with all the slaughtering and killing from before, you would think that, all right, take him out. We're doing him.
Who, Moses?
Yeah.
Well, maybe his daughter would have had an issue with that. And maybe he hugged and kissed him. He also loved him.
He's a cute kid.
Cute kid. Yeah.
80 years old.
No, not at 80. Oh, you're asking at 80? Why doesn't he take him out?
Now he's realized.
That's what you're asking. Oh, yeah. But that's a general question in the story. When Moses and Aaron first came, why didn't they just take him out?
Yeah.
I don't know. Then we wouldn't be here.
I don't think God would have allowed him.
Yeah, I mean that's what I meant. That answer right there. That's exactly what I was about to say. On the ground, why didn't he want to? Maybe he tried. Who knows? The point is, the question, again, the premise of these commentaries is asking the question, why is it that God doesn't heal Moses if he wants him to be the spokesperson and he has this speech impediment? So just heal the guy. Why have Aaron just heal him? And so we have two answers. Number one, so that the miracle is not undone. We want a reminder of that miracle. And number two, we want to get into Pharaoh's head. Right? We want to get into Pharaoh's head. Pharaoh's going to be like, oh, this was the kid with that speech impediment, the coal, the kid, the crown. Oh no, it's coming crashing down. He wants him in his head. It's intimidation. Straight up. Okay. Those are two explanations. Now let's get back to the Ran. The Ran was the one who said that it doesn't seem to be so nice that the spokesperson, the leader, the prophet should not have smooth oratory skills. So we had other commentators that weighed in on that and why God didn't fix that. But the Ran himself, who asked that question, he gives a powerful answer. And I think this may have been what you were thinking about before. The crux of his answer is, and we're going to read it inside, it's really beautiful, is that if Moses was a smooth talker, looking back at history, we would not have known, or we wouldn't know today, if the people followed Moses because of his message, Because of
Demagogue.
his content, or his content, or because of his,
Content.
or his, oof. Wow. Fire right there. Unbelievable. Or his content. Right? Was it because he was speaking the truth? Or because he was such a good speaker, he could wrap everyone around his finger? And so the Ran says, that's exactly why the leader specifically had to be someone who couldn't speak, who couldn't communicate well, so that no one followed him because he was a good speaker. There was not a question. If somebody was a devotee, how would you say it? Devotee. If someone was devoted to Moses, you would know one thing. It's not because of how smooth he speaks. It's not because he got you all wrapped up in his speaking. It's because of the truth and the sincerity that you sensed. It's such a powerful answer. This is the Ran. This is his sermon from 7 centuries ago. Let's read this inside.
Certain people gifted with oratory skills, he can easily influence the masses.
Yeah.
He can make lies sound like the truth.
Yeah. Well, hold on. You're reading ahead. Hold on. Let's read this inside. Text 7. 1 second.
I'm not saying anything.
Who just... You're not saying it. The Ran said it. Who's read? You read. Peter. Go ahead. 237, please.
To demonstrate that he was a spiritual and godly man, Moses was perfect in every sense, yet by deliberate divine design, lacking one basic feature, smooth speech. The reason for this is so no one should think that the reason the entire Jewish nation followed him was because of his oratory skills. As we know what is said about certain people gifted with oratory skills, he can easily influence the masses. He can make lies sound like the truth. This cannot be said about one whose speech is impaired from such an individual. Even the truth is not accepted without it being overwhelmingly demonstrated. For this reason, Moses' speech was impaired by divine design. It wasn't an accident at all. This then is why God responded when he complained of his speech deficiency, telling him, "Who gives man a mouth? I myself, God." Indeed, this was a sufficient answer from Moses.
The Ran has a completely different answer. He's not saying that when God responds to him, "Who gives man a mouth? I myself, God," that God was saying that he was going to fix it or make it better or heal it or he could make it happen anyway. No. He was saying, "Who gives man a mouth? I. And who takes a mouth? I." And this is all by divine design. Because I don't want people following you because you spoke so nicely. I want people following you because they sense that this is divine truth. And the only way that's going to happen is if you're starting with a, I don't know what's right way it says, with a strike against you. In other words, with the natural inclination is that people don't want to listen to you. And if they'll still listen to you, it means that they're sensing higher truth.
It's like bringing a knife to a gunfight and winning with the knife.
Yes, that means that you're really skilled with the knife, or the other guy can't shoot. One of those two is true. Right. Yeah, exactly. So by putting him in a situation where compromising his oratory abilities, it's ensuring that the truth is accepted because it's true and not because it's false. And not because it sounds good. That would make no sense. Sometimes, I'll give you an example. Sometimes you have a bottle of wine that can cost, what's a chazan? What's a good bottle? A really good, I don't mean a cooked bottle of wine, a really good bottle of wine. Yeah, give me a number.
$10,000.
No, not that much. Okay, give me something less. That's crazy talk. Give me something that's higher end.
$100 or $150.
Let's talk about a $150 bottle. Versus, what's on the low end?
I have one that you could buy for me.
Hold on, one second. What's on the lower end?
The lower end, an $8 bottle.
Oh, so you have $150.
$5 chuck, as they say.
Fine, but $8 now because of inflation. So whatever. So you have a $150 bottle of wine, boom, with a nice label, whatever. You have the $8 bottle of wine with the basic label. Yeah, so what happens? So when you open the expensive bottle, you're going to expect, right? You're going to expect that it's going to taste better. And when you open up the other bottle, you're going to expect that it tastes worse. Now, if we did a, what they call like a blind taste test or a double blind taste test, who knows? Yeah, this way or that way. But what if you did this? What if you emptied the bottles and you put in the cheap wine into the expensive bottle and the expensive wine into the cheap bottle? Could you imagine, right, we're not doing the test right now, but could you imagine a possibility that somebody might be influenced by the label and come away saying, not a blind test, but still a fooled you test, right? Because you're giving the impression. Could we imagine that somebody might say, wow, it's such a beautiful bottle, and then say, yeah, that's the better wine? Is it possible? Yeah. Okay, so that's why Moses' bottle could not be so pretty. Because if the container was so beautiful, you would never know if people loved it because of the container or because of what was inside of it. So you specifically put it in a compromised container, so to speak. Right? I'm not saying it's compromised. I don't want to make that judgment. But Moses himself is saying that it's...
It's like al tistakel v'kan kan el b'ma sheyesh bo.
Exactly. That's why I use that example. Which is, don't look at the vessel, the pitcher, but rather what's inside. Yeah, that's the point. So if it would have been a nice, shiny, polished bottle with a wonderful label on it, so to speak, metaphorically, then you don't know if it tastes good because of the bottle, because of the actual wine. But when it's in a bottle that doesn't look so nice, so now you know. If it tastes good, it tastes good. And that's the Ran's point. It's not about the outside, it's about the inside. But here's the problem. You ready? It's such a beautiful vart. I almost feel bad introducing text 8. I really feel bad. But
you'll get over it.
Yeah, and we got to do it. We got to do it because it really pokes a bit of a hole in the Ran's thesis. The problem is, at Sinai, God did heal Moses. Every indication is that at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai, when God gave the Ten Commandments and then gave the Torah to Moses on the mountain, at that point, God healed all illnesses and sicknesses, including Moses' speech impediment. It's in multiple sources, multiple verses speak to this. Text 8 is one example. I'll read text 8. This is from the Devarim Rabbah, 238. God said, "See how the language of the Torah is so dear that it heals the tongue? From where?" I love that quote. From where do we know this? It is written, a healing tongue is a tree of life. Right? What heals the tongue? It's the tree of life. It's the tree of life. Eitz Chaim. And we know what a tree of life is, right? It's Torah. And a tree of life only refers to Torah. As it says, Eitz Chaim hila machazikim, right? It is a tree of life to those who grasp onto her. The language of the Torah makes the tongue fluent. From where do we know that the Torah brings healing to the tongue? The verse states, and its fruit shall be for food, and its leaves for a cure. And that's referring to Torah. Rabbi Levi said, why should we learn that the Torah brings healing to the mouth from elsewhere when we can learn it from here, from the beginning of Deuteronomy, currently under discussion by the Midrash? Where do we see this? How does the book of Deuteronomy begin? Eila hadvarim asher diver Moshe. These are the words that Moses spoke. Clearly he was able to speak. Before he merited to receive the Torah, it is written, I am not a man of words. When he spoke to God in our Torah portion in Exodus, he says, I'm not a man of words. And yet, after he merited to receive the Torah, his mouth was healed, and he began to speak. How do we know this? From the verse at hand, the opening verse of Deuteronomy, these are the words which Moses spoke. And there are other verses that speak to this. It says, Moshe yidaber, v'halakim yanenu v'kol. Moses spoke, and God answered him with a voice. Moses was speaking. And the understanding of the Midrash and the commentaries is that at Mount Sinai, God healed Moses.
Yeah, but that was after.
But one second. Yes, correct. That's after Pharaoh. But it's at Mount Sinai, which is right at the cusp, right at the moment when he will begin articulating the entire Torah. Not only the Ten Commandments, but all of the other mitzvot, 613 commandments. And what happens? The Ran's whole point was that people should follow Torah and God's word because It's God's word, not just in Egypt, but you would imagine that the Ran's rationale was, again, you would think that the Ran's rationale is that Judaism should not be based on a potential smooth talker, but it should be based on people who recognize the truth. Otherwise, you could say, charismatic leader, yeah, many of them. So many people throughout history have been charlatans that were able to convince the masses about something. They were smooth talkers. So we specifically, as someone who's not a smooth talker, and the people are still on board, it must be that they sense the truth, because otherwise it doesn't even add up. Is this true only in Egypt? It should be true as the Torah unfolds and as we get the mitzvot, because how do we know that Moses is still conveying the word of God if he's such a good, smooth talker? So you would think that he should remain with a speech impediment. So the question now is, so why did God heal Moses? And if God does heal at Sinai, and if God does heal Moses at Sinai, what does that do with the whole point of the Ran, that he was supposed to not have smooth talk if he has now smooth talk? This is not my question on the Ran. This question was asked again by the Shalah HaKadosh, Rabbi Yishaya Horowitz. Text number 9. Lisa, please jump in on this, 240.
The verse that states, Moses would speak and God would answer him with a voice, counters what the Ran suggests. For the Ran suggests that Moses' speech was impaired significantly, specifically for giving the Torah. However, the opposite was the case, as Moses was healed at the giving of the Torah. In fact, it was a miraculous event. Moses' speech spread forth to the entire camp, a space of 3 parsot, approximately 12 square kilometers, and was heard clearly over the thunder, lightning, and the sound of the shofar. Our sages indeed said, the mouth that said, I am not a man of words, now Moses would speak. It turns out that the Ran's explanation is implausible.
Yeah. Uh-oh. Shots fired. No, so the Ran says that the speech impediment was all about the truth being spread for the sake of truth and not because of the oratory skills. Okay, well then why and how does God heal Moses at Mount Sinai? And doesn't that undo the whole point of what the Ran is saying? Something's not adding up. So we have to dig a little bit deeper. And what we're going to do now until for the last 6-7 minutes of the class is explore what Kabbalah and Hasidic philosophy says about the notion of speech and speech impediments and Moses and Sinai, and culminating in understanding our purpose today. We're going to begin in a very specifically, what's the word I'm looking for? Lofty, esoteric, vague, confounding text. Amy, good luck with this. Text number 9. I mean, the words are the words, but what it means, that's going to be something else. Text number 10. This is coming from Zohar. This is Kabbalah, and you'll see why Kabbalah is so difficult to understand. Take it away, please.
Moses' voice and speech, which is his word, was in exile, leaving him stuttering. And this is why he said, how then will Pharaoh listen to me? While my word is in exile, I am a voice without a word. For this reason, the Creator associated Aaron with him. As long as speech is in exile, the voice was parted from him, and the word was stuttering, voiceless. When Moses came, the voice came, but it was a voice without a word, because the word was in exile. This continued until Moses went to Mount Sinai and the Torah was given. At that time, the voice connected to the speech, and then he spoke his words, as it is written, and God spoke all these words, as a voice with words. And then Moses was whole and with proper speech, because voice and speech were together in wholeness.
Right? Obvious. Boom.
I think we're done here.
Clearly, we're done. Folks, it's been awesome. Yeah, we have voice, we have speech, which are words, we have exile, we have Moses, we have more exile, we have Sinai, we have more exile, and then we have wholeness. So what's going on? Look, Zohar is written, Kabbalah is written in very esoteric language. It's a very locked, not decoded, encoded language. It's written in a very mysterious way. So this is a very mysterious way of saying something extremely profound. It is profound, but it's saying something profound in a very lofty, esoteric way. So what does it mean? So let's jump in to, I don't know if I want to do text 11. I guess we could. Yeah, let's do text 11. Here we have the Maharal of Prague, the great mystic, the Maharal of Prague, who also, along these lines, explains what was going on with Moses. We're going to get back to text 10, don't worry. But let's look at text 11 as we advance this a little bit further. Mike.
Text 11. There is no human faculty integrated with the body as much as the ability to speak. The sense of sight and hearing require no active movement, whereas a more tangible ability such as speech only works with active movement of the teeth, tongue, and lips. Moses transcended physical matter and therefore was lacking in speech, a most corporal faculty. Now it is clear that although the ability to speak is a most physical activity, it is a product of intellect. One fuses intellect into speech. Moses merely lacked the ability to transmute his intellect into speech. Due to Moses' transcendent nature, he was driven not towards physical matter, but to that transcendent quality.
Does that make sense? A little bit more? Yeah? Who's getting a little bit of what we're trying to say here?
I do. Sometimes, I think a good example is when you study Kabbalah at all in general, you do a beautiful job of explaining it, but I'll go to Amy and try to tell her what I learned, and it just comes out jumbled. So you understand it intellectually, but don't have a way to bring it into the physical world.
Good. And this is what the Zohar was saying about voice and speech. You have the physical component, and then you have the messaging that the voice is conveying. You have the voice, which is the actual sound that's coming out, and then you have the speech and the words that are being said, which reflect the ideas and the thoughts that are wish to be expressed. And so you have really two elements. And the higher the idea is, the harder it is to connect with the speech and the voice that's going to produce the speech. And so because of the lofty nature of the speech, of the words, which are connected to the intellect of Moses, because of that, the voice itself was also exiled, if you will, and it came out as a stutter. Let's take a look at how the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, and really, with the Alter Rebbe, really began a new phase of the making sense of Kabbalah through the teachings of Chassidus and Chabad Chassidus. Chabad is Chachma Bina Das, about making the mysticism understandable in the mind. So take a look at how the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, makes sense of these previous two teachings in a way that I think we can all relate to text 12a. David.
This then is the meaning of the verse. For I am heavy of mouth and heavy of tongue. What this means is that Moses' soul stemmed from Tohu, where the light is very powerful and unable to be contained. This was reflected in the fact that his speech was impaired, for he was unable to contain the intensity of his intellect in the container of his mouth.
Thank you. It's like when you see something that you become awestruck, and you can't even express it in words. You stammer because you don't even know what to say. Something is so deep, so powerful, so true, so real, so awesome, so maybe beautiful, or maybe so painful, or so joyous, so happy, or so sad, God forbid. But you can't even express it in words because it's so big, and it's likened to the experience of the world of Tohu. As we've said in Kabbalah classes many times, so there's the world of Tohu and the world of Tikkun. The world of Tohu is a world of chaos. Tohu means chaos. Why is it chaotic? It's chaotic because the energy of that world is so big. It's too big for the vessels to contain the energy. And so it ends up shattering the vessels, shavirat hakelim. But let's leave that aside for a moment. The point is that Tohu symbolizes any situation where the energy is too big for the space. So if the mind is filled with so many ideas at the same time, and the mouth finds it unable to express them because it's so big, so powerful, or the heart is filled with such emotion, and the words can't express it, that's an experience of Tohu. Tohu is where it's too big for the vessels to contain it. An idea that's so bright that the mind can't wrap its head around, or light, physical light that's too bright that the eye can't capture it, and it, God forbid, damages the eye. Or an emotion that's so big, so deep that the heart can't contain it. or an idea that the mouth can't express. All of these are examples of the energy of tohu. Tohu means big, chaotic, bigger than the vessel's energy. Now, we live in a world of tikkun. Typically, that means that we can handle the experiences and express them and have conversations. But sometimes you have experiences that are tohu. Moses, his soul came from tohu. Right? Men are from Mars, women from Venus. Most people are from tikkun. Moses came from tohu. New book. Right? Moses came from tohu. His soul was supercharged. High energy. So supercharged that his words couldn't contain the truth of his understanding. Text 12b. So that's what Moses says to God. I can't. It's too big. Let's pass the baton, if you will.
God replied, "Who gave man a mouth, or who makes one dumb or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, God?" God was telling Moses. "Yes, the containers of speech are conventionally found in tikkun, and your soul is too lofty, and thus the profound light of your intellect is unable to be contained within your mouth. However, who gave man a mouth, i.e., who is the one who designed the mouth to be the tool to draw down the light from finite vessels of tikkun? It is I, God, the essence of God himself, the source of all levels. If so, nothing is beyond me. I will be your mouth." With this, God informed him, I feel like I'm reading Haggadah. I will be your mouth. With this, God informed him that though his soul was rooted in tohu and he lacked the appropriate vessels, nevertheless, I am the God who fashioned these containers of tikkun and the lights of tohu, and so I can change the natural way and fuse tohu and tikkun, namely that the immense light of tohu will also have the quality of tikkun, i.e., that it will be sufficiently contained.
What God is telling Moses is, you're right. You come from tohu, and your ideas are too big, and you can't contain them in your words, and there's no way that you can speak it in a way that's intelligible to other people because it's too big. It's like a great artist or visionary, I don't want to compare it to Moses, but it's like a great artist or visionary who is so ahead of his or her times that no one can relate to it. They don't get it. Only after they pass away, sometimes you hear these artists that in their lifetime they were, which artists were like this? I've heard stories. In their lifetime, they couldn't sell their art. And later on, it was like, oh, wow, that was amazing. Because the world caught up to that person. So Moses is like spiritually way ahead of his times, way ahead of everything. He's in a different realm. And so his words can't catch up. His words just can't contain that energy, can't contain that messaging. And so on a physical level, he has the speech impediment. And so what God is telling him is, you're talking to God, right? And I, God, can do anything. The impossible is not impossible to God, to the essence of God. Yeah, you might have constructs, spiritual constructs of tohu and tikkun, and they can't combine. So if you have the energy of tohu, it won't be able to be contained in the vessels of tikkun because that's a contradiction. If you have, infinite light, it can't go into a finite container because infinite and finite can't get along. But God says, wait a second, I'm God, beyond both infinite and finite. God is not infinite, God is not finite, God is God. God is essence. God is truth with a capital E and a capital T. So God says, you have energies of tohu, of this chaotic, unbridled, infinite energy, and the vessels of speech are from tikkun, are from this limited realm, and they can't combine, no problem, I got this. God says, hold my beer. God doesn't say that, but what he means is, he might have said this, is that, yeah, I can pull that off. Because tohu and tikkun are only contradictions on a lower level where they are contradictions, but on the essential level of God's oneness, tohu and tikkun, no problem. So God says to Moses, I can fuse these together. When is the ultimate fusion of this? It begins when Moses speaks to Pharaoh. This is a completely different explanation, by the way. So I would suggest you don't have to necessarily match it up with anything that we've said before. This is a new angle on this. So work with me on the timeline. So God says to Moses, I want you to be the leader. I want you to be the spokesperson. And Moses says, not going to happen. My soul is from tohu, and you want me to do a tikkun thing. You want me to have conversations and dialogue, and that's a very tikkun, in the box type experience, and I'm a tohu soul. That's not the same. And God says, those divisions of tohu and tikkun, those are lower level divisions. I'm going in essence. In essence, the lines are blurred. Tohu, tikkun, it doesn't matter. It's all one, right? That's the oneness doctrine of the universe. God is one with everything. Tohu and Tikkun, they can be conjoined. So how does this happen? This happens so God gives him the ability to speak to Pharaoh. But it's not a full ability to speak. Because when he's not speaking to Pharaoh, he can't speak. And so God fully heals him when? At Mount Sinai. So it's a process that begins with the Exodus. And that's when the fusion between the two begins. And it continues and it culminates in a total fusion and healing at Mount Sinai. Why? Because the notion of Moses' speech, of Moses' Tohu's soul, being able to be contained in his Tikkun speech, is really emblematic of the entire process and journey of what was going on an energy level in the world and with the Jewish people. What's the message? What do I mean by this? The Exodus and the giving of the Torah was all about getting the Torah eventually, which brings heaven down to earth, i.e. brings heaven, brings Torah, brings God down to earth, which is the same impossibility. You have Torah, which is God's infinite wisdom, being delivered to human beings of flesh and blood, finite beings. You have God's infinite wisdom being housed in a physical scroll. That makes no sense. You have infinite wisdom in letter form, with ink on parchment. How? If it's finite wisdom in a finite book, scroll, I got it. But infinite wisdom, divine wisdom in a finite scroll, impossible. To take the energy of a mitzvah, the infinite energy of a mitzvah, connection with God, and to put it into tefillin, Shabbat candles, tzitzit, matzah on Passover. Some person rolls this really tasteless and expensive dough, right? Bakes it for 30 seconds. Charges you an arm and a leg and a firstborn child for it, right? And then you eat it on Passover, and it's a mitzvah that draws down God's infinite energy into the world. Are you in the cracker? You have the infinite. That's the point.
What you do in the wine, especially if it's good.
Especially if it's $150 bottle. It all comes back to that. So here's the point. The whole purpose of the Exodus, which is the Torah, and the whole experience of the Torah, and really our mission in life, is to bring the infinite God into a finite space. And that's exactly what Moses was saying can't be done in his own personal experience. How could I speak the infinite word, or how can I contain my infinite soul, inspiration, God, divine inspiration, whatever, it's infinite, how can I contain it in words? And God said, that's the point. And I'll help you do it. Tap in not to the limitations of the spiritual constructs, but tap into the infinite, tap into the essential energy of God, which is beyond finite and infinite, and confuse the two together. And it's going to happen within you. You're going to be able to speak, and then you're going to be able to really speak, and that's going to happen with the giving of the Torah when the world will learn how to speak. When the world will learn how to speak God's language through studying Torah and through doing mitzvot. So when we do a mitzvah, we are speaking God's infinite language in limited form. And this is really what Mashiach is all about. It's all connected. What is Mashiach? Mashiach is a time when the world, not just individuals will be doing this on a small scale or on an individual scale, but the entire world, which is a finite world, will be housing the infinite divine energy. That's what the Messianic era is. It's God's infinite Tohu light in a finite space. So how do we get there? It's by each one of us carrying this mission. Each one of us being the Moses, of being the mouthpiece, so to speak, to the infinite message. It's by studying Torah, like we're doing tonight. We're studying the infinite wisdom of God, but in finite conversations. And it's about doing mitzvot. Straight up, doing a mitzvah, doing one more mitzvah, adding a mitzvah, doing it a little bit deeper. It's about doing another mitzvah, which again expresses the same idea of taking the infinite and bringing it down into the finite, and thereby making this world, this finite world, a space and a home for the infinite presence of God. So, we have our calling. It's the same message that Moses got 3,000 years ago. And the message is, God says, I will be your mouthpiece. I'm going to make it happen. Just open your mouth and the infinite energy will flow. Let's make it happen. Let's bring heaven down to earth, and we pray for a time when there's only peace and happiness and health and blessings for us and for all mankind. Thank you very much for joining me tonight for Torah studies.